In this first portion of the program, Ray had went over kind of what we're doing overall, but the first portion of the program is going to be basically the color book that's bound that you have in your bags today. If you'd like to follow along, PowerPoint basically just kind of illuminates some of the things that are inside there, but we'll kind of walk through that report very quickly. I'm not going to read it to you, nor am I going to read the slides, but we wanted to make sure that you knew of the resources that were there, some of the resources that we have online at workforcezone.org, and several of the different things that we can point you to in terms of helping you as employers to engage in some of these innovative solutions and have all of the intel that's been collected. We're really thrilled that we had 142 employers that are represented in this particular survey. That's actually up from about 100. We had roughly 40 in the survey that we did back in 2005. Just kind of going over this next half hour very briefly, we'll be looking at what motivates us to look at these workforce gaps. Why is it important to go to this extent to measure the different types of skill gaps and what employer perceptions are of the workforce here, not only in Southwest Missouri, but in our 4 states broader economic region. What economic harm is caused by those gaps, and how do we align those things and look at innovative solutions? There are 4 categories of skills. That's kind of oversimplifying it. If you're in education, you know there's hundreds of categories of skills, but we're looking at things from a broad level in terms of what employers are seeing, what some of those gaps might be. We're looking at training trends and trends in the human resources field here for the area that were expressed by the survey. What some of the hiring trends are, the hot occupations that were cited in the survey, and we have additional research on just basically the overall, the numbers that were not in the survey that we got from our research source that you can tap into as well. And then obviously talk a little bit about what impact the tornado has had on the workforce, both positive and negative. A lot of dynamics there, and then just hit very briefly on some of the solutions and strategies, of which one of the big areas, the National Career Readiness Certificate and the Work-Ready Communities, that's what a lot of our summit conference is built on this morning. A number of areas, not only just in Missouri, but again in Kansas and Oklahoma, and even one of our panelists scheduled to be here is from Oklahoma as well. This is the one where we talk about manufacturing being about a quarter of our survey respondents. Strong representation in healthcare, construction, retail, customer service. I mean, it very much mirrors what you typically see in the composition of our regional economy. But good representation between the geographies of the region as far as, you know, where size may happen to be, but also from the types of businesses that we have in the survey. It's not just concentrated heavily, more so than appropriate into one particular sector. So this is what really motivates us to dig deep into this type of research. And when we say we, it's not just the Workforce Investment Board, but our partnerships that we have with education training providers, that we have with chambers of commerce and economic development organizations, with local communities. This was really crucial to know that the WIB is able to bring things together and help kind of manage the chaos behind the scenes for a project like this. But we have really good allies out there with our partners in economic development and education, the employer community, that help pound the pavement and get the word out in terms of having such a good response for our surveys. You'll probably hear me acknowledge several times that we certainly couldn't do this alone. But starting on page 2, we start to outline some of those challenges and certainly what might be termed as a lost or a missed opportunity. That's really what we're looking at, and we come up with a list of several that are common around the country and then allow for some open-ended responses. But the reason that we look at this is that we know that there's an element of being able to attract companies to the area, but also a huge critical piece of wanting to retain what we have. Good foundation that we have in some of our legacy assets here in the region, that we want to make sure that those companies are strong, and that when it comes time for expansion, that we can cater to the needs of those firms. And so the whole retention piece is really important, and that's another element in terms of looking at the challenges or lost opportunities that we have. They basically do fall in 3 broad categories as far as the most critical issues. Anything along the lines of expanding employment, that could be adding additional shifts in an existing facility, or maybe expanding a facility and adding additional employees. If we're not able to resolve gaps both in quantity and quality, that's going to hinder some of those opportunities. Now, if a company is not able to expand, say in one of our communities here in this region, but they are 5 or 6 states across the country, then that could actually result in a loss of jobs if they're looking at being landlocked. You can look at the same thing from a workforce perspective, being workforce locked, so to speak. If we cannot facilitate expansions here in the region, then we have a very strong risk of losing companies to another part of the country. The production levels are very high, and again, another retention issue, that if we can't maintain production within our companies, and it's not just in manufacturing, it may be the delivery of some type of intangible service, we're not able to meet basically the customer demand. The companies are going to have to reduce workforce or close or make some negative choices as well. And then overall, kind of the top third overall category, if you kind of group some of these together, there may be a lot of opportunities for innovation, either training innovations, incorporating new technologies, that we lose the opportunities for company to do that if they're not able to find the right employees to match up with those particular demands to meet those improvements. They basically fall in soft skills, and then the closely related basic skills and thinking skills, and then overall our technical skills. Now, we asked two real key questions here. What do you see the critical issue being in the current workforce, but also projecting out, what are some of the things that you'll see change over time? And while soft skills continues to be the top issue, is what we saw back in 2000 and 2005 when we did previous surveys, that hasn't changed as well. But we actually see technical skills gaining a lot of ground in future years. Soft skills will still be important, as will thinking skills and some of the basic literacy pieces, but we know that tech skills, for obvious reasons, will continue to increase in priority for employers over the next 3 to 5 years. So starting to break out each of those four categories, soft skills, basically, if you're not familiar with the term, it could be called a lot of things: work ethic or quality that people put into work from a mental or emotional standpoint. Probably have heard the term that some psychological gurus use in terms of emotional intelligence. That's another way to describe soft skills as well. Now, up until this point, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of the new innovations rolling out with the NCRC and work keys, this was a very difficult piece for employers to do any screening or testing on coming in. Some of the other things like basic literacy, you can give a math test, but how do you give a work ethic test, for instance, other than being able to observe someone on the job? Some of that can happen in behavioral interviewing, but you all know what we're experiencing in terms of the challenge of really doing effective soft skills screening up front with the job candidate phase. That is actually getting easier, but up to this point has been one of the most difficult to test and then to remediate through the process as well. Another important thing about soft skills is that this is not just a workforce quality, but soft skills are very important in and out of the workforce. Citizenship and raising families, that there are a number of benefits to soft skills overall, but obviously from the workforce perspective, it continues to be a top priority. The next category is thinking skills, and I'm kind of going in this order in terms of the priority that was expressed. Thinking skills was a top priority in the current workforce of employers overall. It goes deeper than just the basic literacy, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But the thinking skills, if a job candidate does not possess this category very well overall, you're going to have a very difficult time advancing from just the very basic level, entry-level types of tasks. If they're not able to do critical thinking, decision-making, it may be very difficult for that individual to advance and to grow within the company. Decision-making and problem-solving are two real critical areas, as you see from the graph. There's definitely, what we've watched over the last 12 years or so with these surveys, is an increasing need for frontline staff, your entry-level people. Once they do well, they come in, they perform, oftentimes you reward them with a promotion, right? Put them into some kind of supervisory role, and we've had focus groups over the years where that's presented challenges to employers. You have a great producing employee, but then you put that person in a supervisory role and they encounter some challenges. So we've had programs over the years with the Alliance for Business and rolling out considerably more in the way of basic supervisory training, and that continues to be an in-demand item. So we mentioned that in some of the comments and recent history that we've had with this overall piece of thinking skills as well. We did make some changes in terms of how we asked the question for basic skills from what we did in previous surveys. Reason being is we really wanted to align that with the broader categories that are within the NCRC and work keys, so we tweaked the titles just a little bit. But you can see the overall, it's fairly even. There's not one that's just way more and one way less in terms of categories overall. Other than the English language, it's not a critical in terms of the majority of our employers having difficulty with this, but if you're from any of these areas that would have a high concentration in the food industry and a high concentration of an immigrant workforce, then you know that the basic English literacy can continue to present a challenge as well. The technical skills, we've had several observations from employers and what we even see within the workforce system and the Missouri Career Center, that if you have workers that are in transition, particularly some manufacturers that have closed and individuals are making a transition into more advanced manufacturing or into other industry sectors, if they have a basic lack of digital literacy, then they're going to have a difficult time making that transition into new employment. One of the key things we've watched at the workforce board level is that it can be difficult for someone to even apply for a job without a good computer background, considering that most of these processes are automated within companies. They're automated for the Missouri Career Center overall. This is a piece that we watch very closely with customers that we see within the Missouri Career Center. It's a gap that's expected to grow the most, as I mentioned early on when we introduced the 4 categories, that the technical skills category will continue to grow. Employers are, based on the counts we did, are projected that will probably overtake soft skills as being the most critical gap that we'll have in the future. But you think about it, increasing uses of technology, even look at where manufacturing came out of the recession. Manufacturers that were able to go as lean as they could and continue to remain open even with modest workforce reductions, they deployed a lot of techniques during the recession to survive and thrive. On the other side of that, we see companies, and this is something that we've heard from with the Missouri Association of Manufacturers as well, that a lot of companies adopted automation technologies. They were able to do more with less, but even if they have fewer workers in that particular firm, those workers are going to have a higher skill requirement in order to perform the tasks that you see within that type of position. With the technology category overall, it changes so quickly. I mean, there are changes that are being made as we're sitting in this room this morning all over the world. So we asked the question about, well, what are some of the specific software applications that they're seeing gaps within their workforce or seeing additional need for training? And that's actually listed on page 8 if you want to dig in a little deeper on those particular details. So as we shift into some of the human resources and hiring trends that we found in the survey, 33 of the 102 employers had cited some specific demand for the HR products. Can kind of make a shift over to page 9 if you're interested in digging very deep into what some of those specific things are. It is primarily along the lines of recruitment of applicants and training of both new employees and existing incumbent workers. You can see overall that that's really where the demand is. According to the employers that had responded, about a fifth of them that had responded to that particular question. In terms of preferred training, we asked this question because even the field of training is constantly evolving. We see the need to try to keep pace with that within the customers that we serve, both the employers and the job seekers, and making for sure that their training matches up to what the demands are in the industry. So we asked the question, what are some of the preferred training formats? Because training isn't always within 4 walls anymore. There can be training that happens at companies, there can be training that happens online, certainly other types of experiential training that we'll dig in a little deeper on the product side, on the job training, apprenticeships, some other pieces in terms of where individuals can learn skills. And another important piece on the training, don't limit it to just one type of training. It could be very much blended. There may be a portion that is classroom off-site. There may be a portion that's classroom on the company location. There may be an element that, okay, let's watch you over a few weeks and then bring you back in after you've had a chance for some on-the-job training. So those training formats, don't think of those necessarily in silos, because it's important to see, yeah, what's the preferred format. And we do, on a lot of these questions, allow employers to select more than one answer. So at that point, we're just kind of looking at the frequency of how a particular format or a category would be selected throughout the survey. We also took the opportunity for a lot of employment training providers through the region to ask our customers, our business customers, the 142 employers in the survey, what do you think about these training providers? And a lot of those satisfaction rankings will start on page 10 if you want to kind of dig to the bottom of what those providers are looking at. One of the interesting elements of that question, they're overall positive, which is, it's a good sign. There's also, I think, a lot of underutilization. A lot of our respondents, these employers, did not have experience with several of the training providers in there. For instance, on university outreach and extension, a lot of employers may not know that there are resources within the university system that are available in practically every county in terms of an extension office that could be utilized as a training resource. Small Business Development Center, we think of always referring people that want to start up businesses, but they have a lot of good training resources for incumbent workers on some high demand skills as well. Now this is an interesting question in terms of what employers anticipate their challenges for just overall recruitment will be for the future, and this is in the category of both skilled and unskilled labor. I wouldn't say that it's negative, which is a good thing. I think we'd all probably like to see it maybe be a little more positive than it is. We definitely have that kind of middle of the road fair category on both skilled and unskilled in the future. So yeah, it could be a lot worse, but we tend to think that it could be a lot better. So what are the strategies that we dig into long term that will improve that perception of confidence of employers in looking for the candidates that they're going to need in the future? Now, in terms of some of those trends and maybe why it's not as positive as we would like it to be, is that we've had a lot of increased competition for the labor pool that's out there. Really probably 3 sources of competition. I put 2 of them on here. We certainly have companies that are now recovering and rehiring again after the recession, and this is at the national level, but certainly while we had a few reductions, a lot of those firms are coming back. And then, of course, everything with the post-tornado workforce that, certainly is a Joplin and Duquesne event, but with our workforce being so regional and so mobile, a commuting type of workforce, it really does affect all of our surrounding counties. And that's the competition that we've had for additional jobs. A lot of contractors have come that were not in the region to begin with. They're offering some temporary wages, albeit temporary, they're very competitive wages. And so we've had several companies express to us over the last half a year that it's been tougher to find the candidates at that kind of post-recession, that there'd be a lot of people on unemployment still. It has been more of a challenge than what was originally anticipated. There's a continued demand for production, which is no surprise. That's a legacy sector here for the region. We have a lot of manufacturing. We have a lot of strong manufacturing that's very diversified. It'd be no surprise to see continued demand in that category. And while the healthcare demand may be down a little bit from recent surveys, it's still a very strong, respectable category. There's consistent demand for healthcare, and we illuminate a little bit in terms of even look RNs versus LPNs. We did kind of see an occupational demand shift, that there is more of a demand for RNs and less of a demand for LPNs than what we identified in previous surveys. What happened as a result of this natural disaster was phenomenal in terms of the response that we had for all different kinds of categories and organizations, faith-based groups, and just people from around the country, the outpouring of support that we had. But it reminded me coming into this that when we started to measure job loss, we actually had a lot of help in doing that initial outreach to the affected populations, both job seekers that maybe from outside the community, they didn't lose a home, but they lost a job from a business that was destroyed, or it was maybe someone that was unemployed as the tornado happened, but lost a home and even had their situation further exacerbated. But we had a huge help from our neighboring workforce board from Springfield, Missouri on this side of the line, but also from the state of Arkansas. They lent us a mobile unit. The Southeast Kansas and the Northeast Oklahoma WIBs brought staff up to help us. And not just in that first week. I mean, when we encountered additional demand later on, they said, hey, can we help you out? And they sent additional staff here. The job loss was actually much less than anticipated, and our Kansas colleagues, as a result of the Greensburg tornado, they were able to help us with some measurement aspects initially. They helped draw a path, and all this was happening actually in Kansas, even as we're still kind of trying to figure things out. But they had drew a number that if you just looked at the businesses that were affected and the employer counts that we had on record for those companies, we had originally anticipated our impact would be 4,500 jobs that would be lost. And we are more than thrilled to be so wrong about that number. It's hard to admit when you're wrong, right? But in this case, we're very excited that the job loss was actually much less than that. And it's a difficult number to nail down because some of these employment characteristics or statistics are very lagging. I mean, it can often take 6 months to a year to get this information in, and maybe we'll have better intel as we get through the next year or so. But just looking at initial unemployment claims, it looks like that number was much less, around 1,500, and it could even be far less than that because it's very difficult to even split out the information that comes from the state agencies in terms of were the new unemployment claims related to tornado job loss or were they from some other cause. The 1,500 was basically that kind of number through May, June, July for just Jasper Newton County, so we tried to isolate that as best as we could. We've had a lot of sector shifts in the workforce. As we mentioned, the construction sector, which suffered during the recession for obvious reasons, grew exponentially as a result of the tornado. And then when I refer to geographic shifts, but we're looking at a new source of workers that have come into the region as a result of the storm. Apparently there's a pool of workers that actually follow natural disasters, and that's what they do for a living basically. That is their careers. From the temporary workers that we have through the Disaster Recovery Jobs Program, and I'll allude to more of that program in just a moment, we've actually had several out-of-state people that applied for some of the temporary tornado jobs that were in Joplin. That's where we kind of learned, just talking with folks one-on-one, that hey, people follow disasters and just for sustainable employment. One of the things that we wanted to do, and you can dig into this on page 13, is we actually, not knowing what the full impact of the construction sector growth will be, because we're really still, the story's being written as we speak, wanted to see what at least, if we were to look at 100 jobs, 1,000 jobs, 500 jobs, we actually had the capability with our research functions at the WIB and our economic development partnerships to at least try to measure the impact. And so what you see starting on page 13 is a sample impact analysis that if we have so many jobs within a particular subsector of construction, how does that spill over and affect other industries within the region? When you're bringing in new construction jobs, for instance, how does that affect retail? How does that affect your local public service functions and units of government? And so there's some insightful material in there in terms of what we could anticipate seeing in the near future, that other sectors may grow, even just tied strictly to the growth that we've had just in the construction sector. Another piece on this before we move into the Recovery Jobs Program is the notion that we do have specific workforce strategies within the CART, which actually I think has another public meeting tonight, if I understand correctly, in Joplin. The Citizens for Advancing the Recovery team, there's a business retention task force within this framework that has advised on specific recovery strategies for business. And then fortunately there's a workforce category of that as well. And so work-ready communities, that's actually one of the key recovery strategies for Joplin that was presented to the City Council. And then the notion of using some of our advanced training initiatives, digital training through the Alchemy system was another piece. And so workforce is very much a part of the economic recovery for the business standpoint of what we see in the overall Joplin effort. So the Disaster Recovery Jobs Program was a $12 million grant from the U.S. Department of Labor. It actually covers several areas in Missouri that were affected by flood disasters as well, but the majority of that activity is here in southwest Missouri with the Joplin tornado effort. There's three real key motivations for the Workforce Board, both our volunteers and our staff, as to why this program is worthwhile. It is a difficult program to manage, and you can ask any staff all the dark times we had this summer in trying to get this program off the ground. But what was really motivating us was three key areas. We wanted to be able to provide labor that would be part of the overall recovery effort. What is the workforce system's contribution that we can have in doing cleanup and doing humanitarian work and so forth? It provided us a chance to give jobs to the unemployed. We had the first priority of those workers that were directly impacted by the tornado. For example, their business was closed. But then we were able to go through and look at long-term unemployed and put those folks to work in a worthwhile activity as well. But this is something that we started to dig deeper into the implementation of this project and realize this is a really valuable piece of it, albeit maybe a big picture piece. But we wanted to avoid the Katrina effect, and that's the notion that when you have a natural disaster, if all of a sudden you have a mass exodus of jobs, then individuals start to lose confidence in your community and in the economic recovery of that community. And so if we're able to retain workers, because it is a temporary jobs program, they're limited to 1,040 hours of employment, which is about 6 months. If we were able to retain those workers for a short time and keep them here being productive and earning a wage during this period of rebuilding for these companies, then we would have an active pool of workers available to go to work once these companies reopen. That was a key piece for us. And so we have the opposite, fortunately, of the Katrina effect for the most part. I think what we do see, if there were any issues about losing population here in the area, it's going to be more on the residential end, which progress is being made, so that's great. But at least from a workforce standpoint, we have the resources to retain the workers, both with the increased demand that we have for positions, and even if someone's not able to attain one of those positions, if they're underskilled, so to speak, then we have temporary work that can keep them here in the workforce. The categories basically come in debris removal labor, which is our largest category, and you can see the employee counts for AmeriCorps, Joplin, and the city of Duquesne that are in your book there. But we also have several organizations doing humanitarian work, faith-based organizations, community organizations, and even local units of government that were able to place workers in this particular program as well. We hit our peak in October, and it's actually started to go down a little bit since then. We have reasons for that cited in the document there. But at our highest, we were around 800, and we're down in that 500 to 600 range, but we anticipate that that's actually going to maybe bump up a little bit. The weather has a lot to do with that in terms of what we see with debris work that's going on in the area, and then certainly phases of the debris work that you can see if you just kind of look at Joplin 1 month to the next and what some of the progress has been. We anticipate that number will bump up just a bit as we get into the spring. We get into some of the tree planting initiatives for reforestation throughout the city, all the parks work and different opportunities where this pool of workers can be involved. We anticipate that number will go up a little bit, but we actually just found out officially last week that our grant, which was initially 1 year, has been extended to June of 2013. So we'll be able to sustain this debris labor effort as long as necessary. And what we hear from our humanitarian work sites and working with FEMA is that there's continued demand to keep these folks working basically as long as they can run. There are a lot of organizations you can see from the list, the different functions that are out there, but it's not something that would just end because we hit the 1 year anniversary of the tornado. So we have a longer period of time to work with and be able to sustain over the long term. Now, you may recall I said that these individuals are limited to roughly 6 months of employment, and so there's backfill cycle that takes place in this program that we can't extend that individual person's job. But as far as the position goes, we can actually recruit someone an unemployed individual that's eligible and put them into that particular function. And we can overlap and do some things to make sure that there's continuity for the organizations that are using these positions as well. One of the key functions, as you know, the goal of the program is obviously to prepare individuals with meaningful work, but also be able to train them with a skill while they're in our program, whether they're doing debris work or one of the humanitarian posts. Ideally, at the end of the program, and we've heard from a few employers that have hired some of our folks that we prefer kind of refer to it as graduated from the disaster recovery jobs program, rather than, oh, your 6 months ran out. But we've had some good placements and good feedback from employers that have hired out of our pool of workers even before the 6-month period is over, which is perfectly fine. We're glad to have turnover in that regard if it means someone is permanently employed, and that's a good problem to have. Ray mentioned this earlier, and I do want to allude that a week from today, we do have a major job fair. I think we're up to, is it 24 right now, employers that are signed up to participate in that particular job fair, and that's happening in Joplin on the 19th of January. There's actually information out on the registration desk, or you can talk to any of the WIB staff that are here if you're interested as an employer in exhibiting at that particular job fair. We covered some of this a little bit. The debris removal work sites are with AmeriCorps as well as the cities of Joplin and Duquesne. The 22 work sites are all listed on page 17. Basically, to qualify as a work site, it just needed to be some function that provided some direct aid from the tornado for the victims of the tornado, but there's a lot of indirect support functions that we have as well. While that employer count in Joplin, for instance, represents a lot of labor workers, we actually have quite a few workers in City Hall that are helping the different city departments in Joplin with their response efforts and working with citizens and so forth that are able to help out. And so most of it is direct one-on-one work with the victims, but we have some of those indirect support functions that's important to mention in there as well. Rebuild Joplin was actually our first work site, which was a phenomenal organization. It's been interesting to watch the Bright Futures evolution from where they started and how they're able to respond in tornado. We were so thrilled to have that as our first work site and actually have a handful of workers that are there doing some of the efforts behind the scenes with Rebuild Joplin as well. So as we shift gears here in these last few minutes before we bring up our employer panel, the strategies are in pages 18 through 27. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Work Ready system with ACT Work Keys and what that means with our special guests, our employer panel, as well as our keynote presenters later on this morning. We have a lot of workforce solutions available through our system with the WIB. We didn't put every single one in the book today, but we selected the ones basically what we have aligned with some of the identified skill gaps. So a lot of emphasis on the Work Ready system, but also some recruitment screening initiatives, some training innovations and such that are identified throughout that particular category as well. The 4 skill categories I mentioned earlier, they very much align on a big picture scale with the NCRC and some of the remediation services that we have for individuals that don't test as high as we would like maybe that to see. To help with that, I've got a very quick video explaining the Work Ready system and big picture perspective in just a few short minutes, so let's take a look.
Okay, first the good news. The economy is in recovery mode. As our nation continues to navigate one of the most complex economic shifts in recent history, high-tech industries like advanced manufacturing, energy, IT, and healthcare have emerged as engines of our new economy. And now, the not-so-good news. As a result of these shifts, individuals are challenged to find new career paths in these industries. It's a fact. Many of the jobs we lost are not coming back, and the skill requirements for the jobs that are available have changed. Our education and workforce training systems are misaligned and struggle to keep up with the increasing demand for workers with the right skills. This creates a middle skills gap, which continues to widen. This gap puts us at a competitive disadvantage locally, regionally, and globally. So, how do you create a system for workplace success to meet the rapidly evolving needs of our new economy? In the 1950s, ACT reinvented college admissions in America, changing secondary and post-secondary education along with it. Since that time, we've also developed the world's largest database of workplace skills. It's only logical that we put this unique knowledge to work reinventing talent development. ACT is the source of information for skill requirements in a fast-changing economy. While many tools such as assessments, training, and certification are already in place today, none of them talk with each other. That's why ACT has developed a series of integrated workplace tools that create a comprehensive, evidence-based solution to help meet our changing workforce needs from the beginning of a career and throughout a lifetime. With our work readiness system, we haven't reinvented the wheel. We've created a new wheel for you to reinvent your workforce. The work readiness system is composed of 5 core components: job analysis, assessments, training and curriculum, certification, and research and analytics. Here's how it works. You start with our skill map process for profiling cognitive workplace skills. This tells you which real-world skills are needed for a job. You then measure prospective and incumbent employees accordingly using our WorkKeys job skills assessment system. If the individual is a good fit, they move on to a skills certification. However, if additional training is required, you can use our KeyTrain skill development curriculum, aligned with the WorkKeys system. Remember how it's all integrated? Employees with the right skills earn portable credentials like the National Career Readiness Certificate. And here's where the fun starts. Using our skills system as a base, industries can create stackable credentials promoting career pathways, like the Manufacturing Skills Certification System. After this, you can take advantage of our research tools and analytic expertise to better understand your talent supply and demand needs and inform your ongoing skill development process. With ACT's Work Readiness System, individuals can prove they have the skills needed to succeed, while employers can develop their talent supply chain. You can also close skill gaps with our innovative use of profiling, assessment, training, and analytics. In fact, our proprietary job analysis process is what makes ACT's system unique. No one else profiles cognitive and soft skills. It can also be deployed rapidly, leading to better employee selection, retention, and targeting of training resources, as well as lower turnover. All of this adds up to an aligned, efficient, and scientifically proven system for reinventing your workforce. Talk about ROI. A flexible, multidimensional system to meet our ever-evolving workforce needs. ACT's Work Readiness System. Reinvent your workforce. To learn more, please visit act.org/workforce.
So there's a very quick, high-level view of what's available within the ACT system that we have with the NCRC and WorkKeys in Southwest Missouri. We brag quite a bit for good reason, and the reason we can brag is that we have a dozen or so employers, 8 or 9, that very actively utilize currently in the Joplin area the ACT WorkKeys system as a real key piece for what they do with their recruitment and their overall workforce initiatives.